Europe is cracking under pressure you can actually measure. Technology blackmail, climate promises collapsing, far-right parties rewriting the rules in 18 countries, and scandals so bizarre they sound like satire. But this is November 2025, and every single one of these stories is verified fact. I'm Andrew Meet Rich, and today we're connecting dots that most outlets won't even acknowledge exist. I spent years inside one of those big polished media companies, the kind with the slick graphics and the carefully scripted narratives. I watched editors reshape stories to fit agendas, saw inconvenient facts get buried under corporate priorities. I walked away because I value truth over paychecks, and now I work independently, answerable to nobody but you. I tell you what actually matters, not what someone upstairs decided you should hear. Before we dive deeper, do me a solid. Hit that like button, smash subscribe, because YouTube's algorithm buries independent voices like mine unless you actively signal support. And if you value the hours I spend fact-checking, cross-referencing sources, making sure I'm not feeding you misinformation, consider sponsoring this channel. It's a real grind to verify every claim, to chase down original documents, to separate signal from noise in this information war. Your support keeps this operation honest and independent. And trust me, stick around until the end, because the most jaw-dropping detail is coming in the final minutes. Let's start in Berlin, where Germany just declared technological war on China. The government announced a complete ban on Huawei components in the country's communications infrastructure, not just 5G but the entire network architecture. They're compensating telecom operators with serious money to rip out existing Chinese hardware and rebuild from scratch. A new law is moving through Parliament that could set digital sovereignty standards for the entire European Union. Sounds decisive, right? Sounds like Germany finally taking control of its technological future. Except here's what they're not telling you in the press releases: Germany imports roughly 95% of its rare earth metals from China. 95%. These aren't luxury goods. These are the essential elements that make modern electronics possible. You can't build smartphones, electric vehicles, wind turbines, or defense systems without rare earth metals, and China controls the global supply chain with an iron grip. Now, Beijing has introduced new bureaucratic requirements that are, let's be honest, straight-up extortion. German companies that want licenses to import these critical materials have to hand over confidential commercial data, proprietary information, trade secrets, directly to Chinese authorities. No transparency, no appeal process. Just surrender your competitive advantages or get nothing. This is technological blackmail operating in broad daylight, and it's working. The German government responded with emergency diplomatic consultations at the highest levels with France, trying to coordinate a European response. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Europe has no leverage. They outsourced their supply chain dependency to a geopolitical rival, and now they're discovering that autonomy has a price tag they can't afford to pay. You want digital sovereignty? Great. Where are you getting the physical materials to build that sovereignty? This isn't about patriotism or nationalism. This is about basic strategic logic. You cannot be independent if your adversary controls the raw materials you need to function. Germany is trying to ban Huawei, while simultaneously begging China for the metals required to build the alternatives. The contradiction would be funny if the implications weren't so serious. Every European nation faces this same impossible equation. Meanwhile, the European Union just quietly gutted its climate ambitions for 2040. Remember all those bold declarations about cutting emissions by 90%, about leading the world toward a sustainable future, about holding corporations accountable through carbon credit systems? Yeah, about that. Negotiations dragged on for months. Trust in green policies collapsed across multiple member states, and the final compromise is barely recognizable. Countries can now delay implementing carbon credit systems indefinitely. They can purchase international offsets instead of making actual domestic reductions. The 90% emissions cut target for 2040 is being reconsidered, revised, watered down to account for forest fires and potential energy shortages. Experts reviewed the final package, over 1,000 pages of documentation, and their assessment was brutal. Approval on almost every technical point, but zero funding and zero political unity to actually implement any of it. The largest economies in the bloc remain divided on fundamental questions. How much are we willing to sacrifice for climate goals? Who pays for the transition? What happens when green policies conflict with economic competitiveness? Nobody has answers, so they're just kicking the can down the road and hoping future governments will solve problems they're creating right now. Here's my question, and it's one you should be asking too. How many more climate promises will Europe make and then abandon when they become inconvenient? At what point does the credibility just evaporate completely? Because we're watching it happen in real time. Grand announcements, enthusiastic press conferences, detailed policy papers, and then when implementation actually starts, when costs become real, suddenly it's all compromise and delay and excuses. Let's talk about the far right, because this is the story that's reshaping European politics faster than anyone anticipated. In 18 out of 27 EU member states, far-right parties have reached new levels of influence. They're not fringe anymore. They're not protest votes. They're sitting in parliaments. They're in the European Parliament itself. And the old strategy of isolating them with sanitary cordons has completely failed. The reasons aren't complicated. Mass migration without adequate integration systems, economic anxiety among working-class populations who feel abandoned by traditional parties, national identity politics that mainstream politicians refuse to address until it was too late, and aggressive, unfiltered rhetoric that resonates with voters, tired of diplomatic language that never produces results. These parties are now changing the structure of power in Europe's biggest economies. They're forcing coalition negotiations, they're setting agendas, they're making previously unthinkable policies. Suddenly mainstream the West is watching, fascinated and horrified, as populism breaks down political traditions that stood for decades and transforms from marginal phenomenon into the axis around which EU decisions actually rotate. You can dismiss this as temporary backlash, you can call it dangerous extremism, but those labels don't change the underlying reality. Millions of European citizens are voting for parties that promise to prioritize national interests over Brussels bureaucracy, to control borders aggressively, to reject what they see as cultural imposition from global elites. Whether you agree with those positions or find them repugnant is irrelevant to the political fact that they're winning, and now for something completely absurd, but also deeply revealing about institutional breakdown. In Britain, a man loaded with 12 medals walked into an official memorial ceremony for fallen soldiers and passed himself off as a representative of a royal lord. He stood among veterans, participated in solemn commemorations, acted with complete authority. Nobody questioned him until someone posted photos on social media, and the Walter Mitty Hunters Club, yes, that's a real organization dedicated to exposing military imposters, identified every single medal as fake. This wasn't a sophisticated operation. This was a guy with cheap reproductions pinned to his chest, brazenly infiltrating a high-profile government event, and nobody in the official security apparatus caught it. The exposure came from amateur investigators on social networks. Now there are promises of legal prosecution, loud accusations of disrespect, and the whole incident has become a meme across British social media, a symbol of institutional incompetence that people can laugh at even while recognizing how disturbing it actually is. If security protocols can't catch an obvious fraud at a memorial ceremony, what else are they missing? What other imposters, liars, and charlatans are operating inside systems we're supposed to trust? Over in Ireland, there's genuine political shock. A leader from Sinn Féin has been expelled amid suspicions of involvement in conspiracies targeting immigrants, including alleged plans to attack a mosque. The investigation moved fast, and the fallout is massive. Sinn Féin, a major party with deep historical roots, is teetering on the edge of internal crisis. This is dominating national news coverage in a way few stories do, because it strikes at the heart of Ireland's political identity and raises questions about extremism that nobody wants to answer. Across the Atlantic, Donald Trump is threatening to sue the BBC for $1 billion over accusations that the broadcaster edited his speech to misrepresent his statements. There have been mass resignations in the BBC's senior leadership, social media is flooded with competing narratives, and even people who should support the BBC are expressing skepticism about its editorial standards. This is a transnational scandal touching corruption allegations, media bias accusations, and political warfare, with every detail somehow connected to upcoming presidential elections. Trump's relationship with media has always been combative, but a billion-dollar lawsuit against Britain's most established broadcaster takes it to another level entirely. Whether he has grounds for such a suit or this is pure intimidation theatre, the effect is the same. Further erosion of trust in institutions that claim objectivity. And then there's the Epstein documents. The US Congress released tens of thousands of pages related to the scandal involving financier Jeffrey Epstein, the man whose connections to powerful figures have generated conspiracy theories for years. New facts, long-running investigations into white-collar networks, and Trump's name remains classified in portions of the material, which naturally fuels even more public interest. The Oversight Committee promises further revelations, though most of these documents were already accessible through other channels. What this story demonstrates better than almost anything else is the strange combination of transparency and unresolvability that defines elite scandals. Everything is visible, nothing is conclusive, and the public is left to speculate while the powerful remain insulated from real consequences. So let's pull this together. Today we've covered Germany's impossible position between digital sovereignty and material dependency on China. We've seen the European Union abandon its climate ambitions when political and economic costs became real. We've watched far-right parties break through in 18 EU nations, fundamentally altering the balance of power. We've examined a bizarre British scandal that reveals security failures at the highest levels. We've noted Ireland's political crisis and the fracturing of a major party over extremism allegations, and we've traced transatlantic controversies involving Trump, the BBC, and the endless Epstein revelations that never quite resolve. These aren't isolated incidents. This is the pattern of November 2025. Institutions under stress, trust collapsing across societies, contradictions that can't be papered over with diplomatic language anymore, technology, politics, culture, all of it converging into a moment where the old rules don't apply and the new ones haven't been written yet. I broke away from mainstream media because I wanted to tell you these stories without the filter, without the spin that protects power instead of challenging it. If this kind of coverage matters to you, hit that like button one more time, subscribe if you haven't already, and seriously consider supporting this channel financially. Independence has a cost, and your sponsorship is what makes it possible for me to keep doing this without answering to corporate interests or political donors. The fight for truth is exhausting, it's expensive, and it requires vigilance every single day. But it's worth it, because you deserve to know what's really happening, not just what they want you to believe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.